I set my little stage up, I want to say hi to my mum, who's probably watching on the live stream, our faithful watcher. Sorry, I'm ruining your setup, Oscar. And I also want to say, I hadn't realized how much I'd missed singing These Are the Days of Elijah. I was like, bring this banger back. That was incredible. I love it so much. Took me right back to being 10, I don't know. Anyway, hello everyone, I'm Zoe, and it's really lovely to be with you today and to share what I feel like God has talked to me about through this text. And the first random thing I want to say is Chiswick people at the moment, there's one thing you can say to make them quite frustrated and angry, and it's talking about how bad the traffic has got around here. No word of a lie. There's many reasons, and I could get into them all as a driver, but the traffic is bad. And I say that because I have a weird confession. As a learner driver, and for the first few years of when I'd passed my test, I loved traffic jams. I loved them so much. I loved traffic. I loved any traffic calming measures, which are, if you're doing your theory, chicanes, traffic lights, speed bumps. These are traffic calming measures. And the reason I loved them is because they gave me a chance to go slowly, which was my preferred speed as a nervous driver. In fact, these traffic calming measures vindicated, that means proved me right, in going slowly and having a little trail of cars following me. And I loved going slowly because it helped me to notice what was going on around me, and it helped me to feel safe, feel secure as I pool-tooled along in first or second gear. And I say that because I wonder what gear you might feel like you're in as we enter Holy Week today. Holy Week is that rare opportunity to slow down and to walk the week with Jesus and pray, as James has already mentioned. But I know in busy West London life, it can take quite a while to drop down the gears. So just give yourself time this evening. If you feel like you've been go, 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 you're in gear 5, just let yourself drop down slowly. And I'm just giving you permission to do that. And I think Luke is also giving us that permission, because when I first read this passage, when I was preparing this talk, I was struck by how detailed it was, by how many different things are going on. And I was reading it in kind of a rush, and I was like, hurry up, Luke, get to the point, like, what's going on? And I think Luke is refusing to let us rush through it, and I think he's put some traffic calming measures in the text to slow us down, to see Jesus, the multi-layered, multifaceted Jesus. And the first thing I notice when I slow down and read this passage in that posture, in that pace, is that Jesus is going slowly too. Jesus is not rushing into Jerusalem on a horse and chariot, which would have been the expected kingly entry, but instead from verse 29, we see Jesus is approaching Bethany, so he's approaching it. And Bethany should be ringing alarm bells for us. We're like, we know Bethany. That's where his buddies, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus live. And as he's approaching Bethany, he sees it. He gives his disciples those instructions to go find the colt, the unridden donkey. And with my sanctified imagination, I see Jesus chilling out in Bethany, having a little bit of a bite to eat with Mary and Martha and Lazarus as this donkey is being fetched. He has space with his friends. He has space to slow down before this big entry. And then, if we kind of journey to what happens to Jesus next, he is put on the donkey. I find that quite a fun phrase, put on the donkey, in verse 35. And that fulfills a 500-year-old prophecy from the book of Zechariah, that the king would come into Jerusalem on a donkey, on a colt, an unridden donkey. And let's use our imaginations again to actually think through what it would have been like to ride a donkey that had never been ridden. And if you've been around Christchurch a while, you know we have a history with donkeys, particularly at our nativity service. We've had donkeys come at that service, and they've been very stubborn. Sometimes they have not wanted to enter the church. Sometimes they have been almost aggressive, veering into children. Sometimes they have pooed right at the back of church, and that still gets talked about. So donkeys are notoriously quite stubborn. They're notoriously quite skittish and slow. They go at their own pace, slowly, and sometimes they refuse to move. So Jesus is being placed onto this donkey that hasn't been ridden, and he is going slow enough for word to spread that this is happening, for the crowds to gather, for them to come and stop what they were doing, stop their plans for the day, because they recognize something significant is happening as Jesus is making a 2-mile journey. So it was 2 miles from Bethany to Jerusalem, downhill towards Jerusalem. And people are stopping, and people are gathering, and people are coming alongside Jesus in his slowness. And this scene of a crowd gathering around reminded me of when the Queen died, and everything seemed to slow down here as well. We had 11 days between her death and funeral where events were cancelled. It was all anyone was talking about. People chose to join a 28-hour-long queue, 10 miles, to just spend a few moments walking past her coffin. And then on the day of her funeral, a few hundred yards from here, just where the A4 is, the Queen made her final journey from London to Windsor, and her hearse whizzed down that road, and crowds gathered there. I wonder if any of you did, to just get a glimpse, yeah? Just get a glimpse of the Queen whizzing to her burial in Windsor. And people gathered because they wanted to pay their respects. They gathered because they wanted to honor her life. They gathered because they wanted to thank her. They gathered because they wanted to celebrate her rule as queen. It was remarkable, it was significant. It's probably the most significant historical thing that's happened in a long, long time. And to compare this, on Palm Sunday, Jesus is very much alive, but he's entering Jerusalem. He's being celebrated and proclaimed as king. But instead of whizzing by, whizzing through, and people only getting a few moments in his presence, the crowds get to move along with Jesus. I picture children running alongside him as the donkey plods slowly on. People are tearing off palm tree branches. People are laying down their coats, probably to help keep the donkey moving, because it was maybe reluctant. And that helps the donkey keep moving forward. Jesus wasn't rushing. His slowness means he can see each face, he can get eye contact, he can lock in with people, he can hear the songs of joy. And yet he can know that these people that he's talked to, lived with, and shared his life with, would in a few days turn away, and some would shout for his crucifixion just a mile down the road. And this juxtaposition leads me to the other thing that I felt struck by in Luke's account, is that Jesus does not seem as happy about Palm Sunday as Sunday school made me believe. Now, if you grew up in church, if you grew up going to Sunday school, you may have, like me, inherited a very happy, shiny Palm Sunday. My memories of Palm Sunday was that it was a joyful party, really. There were props. It was the time where you could get these big, green palm leaves out. You got to act out and put your clothes on the floor. What a novelty. There were tambourines. There were waving and cheering. There was even a song. It went like this: ho, 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 Hosanna. Do you guys know that one? No, okay. But yeah, that was a song. It was very joyful. And not only that, I got to hear this story of Jesus being celebrated, finally recognized as the king that he is, receiving lots of approval, receiving praise, receiving just the glory that he deserved. And of course, there was that grumpy interlude with the Pharisees. But even then, I got to hear that if we didn't praise, the rocks would cry out. And that would be where the Sunday school version would end. And to me, as a young child, with my main love language being words of affirmation, I just thought this was the best day ever. I thought, wow, this is joyful, this is amazing. And there was part of me that even as an adult, when you get to verse 41, and you see that Jesus is approaching Jerusalem and he's weeping, and you hear him give this really heavy prophetic word over Jerusalem, which comes true just 50 years later. There was a part of me, even adult Zoe, that wants to whisper to Jesus and say, hey, Jesus, let me give you some advice. Just enjoy this. You're going to need this. You're going to need this boost for the week ahead. Why do you have to be sad? Why do you have to dampen the mood? Why do you have to say that weird thing at the end? Just receive the praise, be happy. And I wonder if part of you thought the same when you saw what Jesus said and how he was weeping at the end of that passage. But Luke wants us to know, Luke wants to name the complexity of Palm Sunday. The joyful, triumphant entry element part is there, yes, but it's not the whole picture. Because as Luke notes from verse 41, as Jesus moves downhill and Jerusalem comes into view, he starts weeping. And I think that rings true to reality, doesn't it? Because there's nothing like a slow journey to give you some space, some time to process and reflect, to actually realize how you're feeling, to kind of connect with yourself a little bit. Jesus sees the crowds praising, he hears the Pharisees naysaying, and he sees Jerusalem on the horizon, and his response, his guttural response, is to weep. The Greek word that's used here for weeping is klahio, which means to wail, to sob, to mourn as if someone is dying in pain. It's a heavy, heavy word. It was not just a single silent tear. So picture the scene. Jesus is on a donkey that's moving probably quite slowly. There's crowds praising him, cheering him, and yet he is weeping. He is weeping. Why is he weeping? Why is he weeping? Jerusalem represents the people he has come to save, the people standing right in front of him, the people cheering him. They're still blind to the truth of who he is. It's still hidden from their eyes. And Jesus knows their blindness. Jesus knows their fickleness. And he knows our blindness. And he knows our fickleness. Jesus is not as happy about Palm Sunday as Sunday school made me believe. And that's because the theology and the church tradition I grew up with didn't give much room to acknowledge pain for Christians. I thought to be a Christian meant you had to be happy, you had to be cheerful, you had to always be smiling. But Jesus himself does not say that is the case. Jesus gave himself permission to feel and express the gamut of human emotion. And Jesus gives you that permission today as well. I want to say that however you're feeling today, it's real, and it's important that you're honest with yourself and that you're able to express your emotions. That you're not a bad Christian, you're not less than if you don't always have a smile on your face. No wonder there can be mental health taboos in churches or in the world. Because the truth of this passage is that our tears of pain, our tears when we're deeply, deeply grieving, our tears when we're disappointed, our tears when we're angry, are precious to God. Psalm 58 verse 6 says that the God of all comfort keeps watch over your weeping. He gathers up your tears and puts them in a bottle. God gathers up your tears and puts them in a bottle. And God does that because they're precious. Father God held Jesus' tears too on that day. And we see, if you just look down to verses 45 to 48, Jesus' tears lead to anger. Because the very next thing Jesus does as he has this grief, as he's weeping, as he says this prophetic word, is he goes to the temple court and turns over the tables. That's another sermon. But I think it highlights that grief can often lead to anger, and sometimes it's the other way around. And God can hold your anger too. Because grief and anger are two things we don't really talk much about, I think, in the Christian world. But God is just as much in those emotions as he is when everything is shiny and bright. Jesus does not seem as happy about Palm Sunday as Sunday school made me believe. And this is a gift, my friends. This is a real gift for us to name our emotions, to cry our tears if we have some this week or today, to name the places that we're in. To kind of bring these two elements together of slowness and sadness, I want to highlight that sometimes two things can be true. Because today on Palm Sunday, there is rejoicing and there is weeping. There is a full and busy day for Jesus, but it's done at a slow pace. Full and busy day, slow pace. And in the receiving of Jesus, crowds can be fickle. They can recognize Jesus one day, but then reject him the next. I began this talk by mentioning how I think Luke is trying to slow us down. And through that, we've noticed that Jesus was going at a slow pace. And that slowness enables crowds to gather. It enables Jesus to sit with what he is facing ahead in this Holy Week and weep. And I want to end this talk by highlighting how there can be much more to a story than first glance would give us. Because on Palm Sunday there is rejoicing, but there is also weeping, and both can find a home in Jesus. Maybe these two things are deeply linked. Maybe it is in slowing down that we realize that following Jesus, that this Christian faith isn't about rushing around, it isn't about always having a smile on our face, but instead it is a faith for broken and complex people who have emotions that are real, and that is how God has made them. Maybe this faith is for people who want to wrestle with the complexity of life, who want to wrestle with nuance, who want to wrestle with two things being true, and who want to go slow enough to recognize God when he comes to them.